Okay. Hello, everyone. Hopefully, my voice is loud and clear. Welcome to tonight's episode. At first, I felt a bit drained to give a talk, but the idea was so fresh. Sometimes ideas can energize you, believe it or not. Okay. I want to share with you something that's kind of happened as I started giving these talks. I kind of put my sense of self on under a magnifying glass. You know, the magnifying glass of my own attention. Pretty much I studied how my mind is existing to myself. Eventually I noticed certain differences, but I noticed something very unique, that the more my attention is towards the external, the more I want reality to be static. The more my attention goes internal, the more I want my reality, in some sense, to be dynamic, to be endless. So it's as if the subjective self wants to be infinite, but the objective self wants to, in some sense, I'm going to say void, but I'm kind of thinking about it in the sense of the suffering, as if kind of like a part of the objective reality wants the suffering to stop, and in some sense, the suffering is what's giving it even a sense that there is something beyond it. I kind of find like it's a playful idea to see that. Imagine we experience suffering and then we want joy. But what if you experience joy and imagine there's a utopic kind of situation where there's no problems, nothing, the world is perfect. In that perfection, imperfection becomes the rebellion. The counterculture. So we have to kind of see that. I find history is something that is being responded to right now as I'm speaking, and as you're alive and listening, as we're both alive and listening. Me and you are right now in a certain moment of history, where the collective holds the narrative. How the narrative of the collective is in a certain way. So right now, me and you are at a certain point in history, at a certain development of the civilization's vision. Okay. We're actually alive at a really cool time, and I find like around a range of 100 years, individual reality would be a very rare thing. Many things would be collectivized, if I can say that. Like either objective reality becomes collective or subjective reality. The reason I called the title tonight "The Ethos of Civilization," of course, it was out of you see, you can say ethos is kind of like the ethical kind of lens of looking at something. Pathos is the emotional, and logos, let's say, is the down to the straight kind of like logical approach. Now, what that means is either we see these as separate things, as if each is a separate vehicle, we think about them one by one, or we wonder about their presence together, right? So it's like I was years ago, like I was looking at things on an individual basis, and then eventually I'm like, okay, what's the point of this individual truth that I'm searching? The concept, just the idea of an individual self is dependent on the distance it has from its environment. That means we are defining ourselves out of our environment, you know? So it became something strange where the subjective realm saw that it had to kind of let go of how it had held objectivity in a certain way. So I want to focus on the ethos of civilization, and even though I say we're looking at it as through an ethical kind of lens, but at the same time I want you to kind of see it as this inspiration of the collective. That's the way I'm kind of thinking about it. So pretty much I'm asking this question, okay, from this moment now, 2019, as civilization advances forward, what is the collective inspiration? And the collective inspiration is strange. It's as if we, behind our eyes, we want to be kings in our own kingdoms, but in front of our eyes, we want to be acknowledged by the kingdom. You know, imagine a king that nobody cared about. It's like the guy's just wearing his own crown, you know? Nobody acknowledges him as a king, but he has the crown. So it's one of those things where, or like I've created a story where I just one night occurred to me this would be a nice story where a king puts this king who took the crown by force, puts the crown on his head, and every time he puts it on his head it becomes paper, but when he takes it off it becomes a metal crown. When he puts it on his head, as if the crown decides, as if the universe will present the path to a sort of collective advancement. Now, if one dares to, if one has chosen, let's say, like right now I'm wondering about the collective inspiration. Now, it's either has to do with individual organization. Either pretty much our civilization requires certain figures like military generals, like future generations of children who come, and in some sense they will bring organization for individuals in some sense. Okay, the other way is that we don't start from an individual identity. So we start from at least where it would begin for the individual sense of the being is that it's as if assuming collectivity first. That means all those people looking to become one with the universe. It's like, imagine it, okay, let's say you were one. You were one, now you have entered the two. Now you have entered the dualism of language. So I find it's a combination of all three lenses, you know, and it has to do with the macro view and the micro view of the moment. The micro view of the moment, it's more flexible than the macro, I would say. That means it's more easy for you to kind of deal with your psychology than with the psychology of 10 other people, imagine, you know. The world was the commonality. The world is so fascinating because I've spoken about it. The physical, observable universe, you know, is kind of like given imagination. So if imagination is something of a subtle design, that means it's not tangible, but it has subtlety and it has design. Reality is like imagination that changes slower, you know? And its imagination doesn't seem to be directly correlated, as if I remember I have a talk kind of called "Are We the Imagination of God?" You know. And so just like how thoughts appear, I wondered if existential design appears. That means in a grander picture behind the scenes of this dimension, it's as if a mind is receiving, you know. So what that means is we are the sounds of an engine beyond time and space, maybe. You know, we may be the sounds of an instrument, you know, beyond time and space, beyond conception. So I think man's greatest evolutionary peak is to acknowledge is what he does not know. Socrates found this, you know, he said the only true knowledge is to know that you know nothing. Why would this guy who knew a lot say the only true knowledge is to know that you know nothing? Because he found the unknown, and eventually you will find the unknown. The next problem after finding the unknown is not like, oh no, what do I do with the unknown? It's kind of like, is it self-oriented? Is it a self-oriented solution, or is it a world-oriented solution? That means it's like, how far should man imbue nature with livelihood? That's the question. The more we become valuable, the more valuable there is to lose. The less valuable we become, the more we feel we're missing out on the opportunities of value. I find for each, let's say, the ethos of civilization, the logos of civilization, the pathos of civilization. Of course, I'm using these in my own particular context, but the way I kind of see it is that the logos of civilization led to a technological dimension. The the pathos of the pathos of civilization led to a narrative. So pretty much you can say the logos built external technology, the pathos built in some sense internal technology, and the ethos became aware beyond it, I find. Like there's something that's incredibly fascinating about an unknown potential of manifestation, you know? You can't control life too much too, by the way. I gotta share this. I gotta share this is actually an awesome thing to share. In 2016 I found myself visiting Iran, and long story short, I found myself on a date with this girl who in her dreams she felt she could travel, and her mother was kind of like psychic or whatnot, you know. And I don't know how, but it just somehow happened. And I remember I asked this girl, and she was pretty cute. I asked her, "Why do you even care for spirituality? Like, what does it mean to you? You know?" And I'll never forget it. She said, I forget her name, believe it or not. I forget her name, but I don't forget what she said in that moment. She said it was power. She sought power, and then I thought, okay, it's kind of like in the Vedic culture. There's a sort of response to this. The sadhu, the spiritual seeker that uses their power. It's like it's like Game of Thrones. The other side of the veil is just like shame, shame, shame. The reason is because it's an ego with superior data, which is dangerous to inferior data. You see, it's as if like some people think power means you become the puppeteer of your moment. But you're going to see it becomes incredibly lonely. Some of the most powerful people are the loneliest people, because the maintenance of maintaining that, it's like an opportunity cost, you know. The creative energy in all beings moves in various ways. You know, for some people, their creative expression manifests into, you can say, like children become their artwork. You know, it's as if the parents are living for the child. You know, it's as if they center around that creative phenomena. There's others who, in some sense, do it in, you know, many different categories. Many different creative actions are being done. But what I'm saying is, the attention has pierced through the present possibility and is entertaining future potentials. So this is this was like a question, guys, which I did it like I've kind of like, how do I say it? Like I feel like, excuse me, guys, just a second. You see, I've had moments where I have been a fool of my intuition, and I have lived in moments where, in some sense, I fooled my intuition, you can say. And what I mean by that is that when the external reality speaks louder than the inner reality, you see, strangely, I find like there is this unique stability that comes with that. But when the inner reality speaks more than the outer reality, you completely lose sight of the inner, outer reality. So here's the thing: outer reality maintains your inner reality. So it's kind of like the healthiest way for an attributeless, ever-present attention to kind of be. You can't ignore the objective. I'm telling you, you can try. You can try wanting to escape this world to go to a heaven, but the objective is necessary. You know, it's the thing is that you gotta kind of like at first. I remember when, oh man, I gotta explain so. I consider every day the person wakes up, waves of data are hitting them. I consider that every day that these waves of data hit the person literally sculpts into a sort of framework for the day of their personhood. You know, so I noticed it after many days of realizing, wait a minute, the future can remain the same. Like I could have a vision for the future today, right now, and then sleep and wake up and have a vision for the future. But I hadn't wondered about the past, and so I woke up and I noticed every day my sense of past has been different. How could my sense of future be the same? It was as if the future had lied to me, you know, and I was like, how could you, you know, my vision of the future. It's the living aspect of it that makes the conceptual seem a bit transparent, and that's where the pilot of consciousness needs to navigate. What that means is right now, it's just this, guys. As you're hearing me speak, if you're aware of how the sound is evoking an image or something behind your eyes, and you're aware of what it's evoking, you're kind of there where I'm speaking about it. It's just it's very subtle. It's kind of like you look at the objective dimension, you see how it could be simple, you could see how it could be complex. You look at the subjective dimension, society tells you it's complex, but then you see how simple it is. Believe it or not, it's a reawakening, a return to your own simplicity, or the simple truth that a sort of complex intention kind of emerged in your being. I remember I was in India, and I went up to this man who I felt he perhaps knew a little bit more than the average man, and I asked him, what is the purpose of all this communication with the other, with the invisible other? And he gave a response which it was like I had come to that conclusion, but it was just like the way he said it in that moment was what the impact of it was, you know? And he just said sanskara. He said their impressions. Do you know what that means? That means doubting the divine, as if it's a storehouse of impressions in your mind subconsciously kind of pouring into the conscious view. So what that means is it's kind of like Descartes. Imagine doubting everything except the isolated thinking subject, and then realizing everything can even be doubted. The whole moment can be doubted. But it's like at some point the experience pilots, at some point the ideology pilots. Most people, the ideology pilots them. You know, this is why their alertness throughout the day is so reduced. I got shocked when I saw this. Like, I'm not joking, guys. Like, a lot of people are living right now due to their constant want of the future. Their alertness and attention to the present is reduced. So inevitably, because we want the future in a certain way, we'll get pulled into a program. Now, here comes the issue. We are individuals. We start off in an individual position, at least in 2019. The main kind of mainstream established position is we're individually conscious, objective beings. Now, let's say the subjective, the mysteries of consciousness and the soul, we say that's just we don't know. We don't know. This is all we know. So now I'm thinking, okay, so let's forget about the soul. Let's forget about any sense of a kind of creator. And for a moment, let's see where can this individual objective conscious being go? Do you know, it's kind of like you strip away the context that are choking the concept and you look at the concept in its kind of pure form, you know? Excuse me. So, in regards to the collective vision, let me kind of speed up the talk a little bit. The collective vision, there was a point where, I mean, I'm still under this impression, but in a different way, you can say. I pretty much thought that every person has to reverse engineer through their conditioning, come to a neutrality, where in that neutrality they look at the world again, and when they look at the world again, their true nature responds to the data rather than the conditioned thought they had to be because their environment wanted them to move in a certain way at a certain time. So it's kind of like a return. It's literally like right now we're at, let's say, just think of playfully these as dimensions. The number 0 is a dimension. The number 1 is a dimension. The number 2 is a dimension. Let's say the number 3 is a dimension too. Now the 3 and beyond, I'm not talking about yet. Playfully, I'm saying this. I'm not talking about the third dimension because then I got to get into geometry and then I got to kind of get into a different talk. But I'll come into the second dimension where we say it's a dualistic nature of reality, the subjective self, and then we come to one, which is the objective self, the singular. You know, that the phenomena that is singular. So, and then we have the dimension of 0 where we say it's just space first peeking its head out into the cosmos, you know. It's like space got here first, then matter, you know. And one can even say spirituality is the relationship of intelligence with the space of its being. It's a subjective relationship with the space. That's kind of spirituality at first. And eventually you have to kind of come into a moment where you can trust. If you can't trust, then it's like, what's the point of getting data? It's like your hands are too slippery to hold the truth. It's like, you know, it's like, why couldn't you find the truth? It's like, I found it, but it was so slippery I couldn't see it. So I felt kind of literally like if every person's mind was a pond, the rocks that are endlessly being thrown by identification with the cultural program, with the social program, you know, with the various ways that the environment is moving, identifiable or unidentifiable, still the movement influences us. Once the ripples of the pond of every mind settles, there will be literally an inseparability of a sense of being with all. So it's kind of like right now, it takes a very kind of, I find Think of it this way. The secular society is an incredible development. You know, there was a time where, because we think one idea should rule them all, like Lord of the Rings, that's why there's conflict between people. But people, I find that it's like you notice the ecosystem has a voice which must be respected, and the inner environment has a voice. But the inner environment's voice is more oriented to how the attention is piloted. So when I say you pilot your attention, ooh, that's that's literally kind of me saying that just like how you can move, it's a concept where I'm really like very carefully trying to introduce it. You know, I've had this concept for a while. You know, I've even written things about it, but it's just the pilots of consciousness is some things are introduced from within you. You know? Those things that are introduced from within you, they transform you. But the things that are introduced from outside, those are kind of like, you can say they sculpt the short-term memory, but the things that occur internally arise from the inner environment, those are more long-term. Because behind your eyes is literally just presence in a room. It's kind of like the instantaneity of how the intelligence is here. That's the shock factor. How there's a voice here asking the question and even being able to wonder about the answer, as if the perception, the perceiver is beyond both. You know, I find inner peace is attained through acceptance. Now, you may ask, acceptance of what? What? And I'll be like, okay, go figure it out. Imagine your personalities are your younger self where you're giving freedom to. Imagine your mind is literally, you can't be strict with the inner reality. The moment you go hold it, it literally becomes like sand. It evaporates, the truth of it. So the more stillness makes you more aware of internal movement. And motion, of course, makes you aware of outer movement. That means I could be giving this talk, even closing my eyes and just seeing this movie behind my eyes, but at the same time, it's like somebody could, you know, let's say a rock could be thrown outside and I could just suddenly, my attention could snap out. So trust me, like I've tried to even speak about certain things and it's like the attention is literally like a hose valve that's on. That means if I ask you the relationship of a person with energy, what is that relationship like? It's as if, do people talk to the energy they are? Do you see at some point? No, it's just being here. It transcends the level, literally it goes from the second dimension to the first dimension. That means some phenomena internally, if you stop external action, then you can check it out. You know? There was a moment in my life where I got so, you can say, possessed by anger, that I just had to literally, I had to go internal and I had to make the body still. What that means is I instantly knew that the inner environment was so, there was such a storm in my subjective realm that the objective realm couldn't be managed well. So I just literally sat. I sat at the corner of the room and I tried to be as still as possible. It was literally a moment in my life where I felt the conscious control is shifting. It's as if the turbulence of literally if I was piloting my moment in that moment, it was turbulence, incredible turbulence in my plane of existence. That means chaos and order were hitting harder. They were hitting each other harder in my mind. That means the ethics of my past was being challenged by my present. And as it was being challenged, it was literally like the armies, my past memories were fighting the visualization of the implication of the present action in a way. So what I'm saying is I had to become still, and when I was still, suddenly I could pay enough attention to the inner phenomena, and just as you pay attention, it slowly subsides. You know, the ripples settle eventually when you stop throwing rocks in the pond. Hey Idris, I see your comment in the chat. I'm gonna give the talk, and then afterwards I realize it's a much better time to kind of converse, because this the ethos of civilization. This talk is very. I just hope I can draw it well. Turbulence came. When turbulence came, what does the pilot do? You have to immediately see what the free will has access to. You know, you can pilot yourself as a body howling a mind, and that's not really piloting. That's more like, taking the train. When you live as a body, what you can say, when you live as a mind, it's very fascinating, because it's like you think you are the concept that's the center of the context of your world, and this concept suddenly realizes it's not just only the concept that has to change, it is the context as well. That means don't think you're only changing, so is the world. So I'm simply saying, we as human beings, as creatures on a rock, what else do we have to do? We either just do nothing and die, we do something and die, or we in some sense do something, and that something in some sense is a transformation per se of the conceptual death. The Sufis, the ancient Sufis, had a saying where they would say, like 1,000 years ago in Nishapur, imagine. So these Sufis had the saying where they would say, like Hafez is even known to say this. He says, die before dying. And I always wondered, whoa, like what is dying before you die? And I noticed it is the subjective realm. It's a detachment from the subjective realm. Shir Ramana Maharshi says there will come a moment where everything that is learned will be forgotten. And what that means is you gotta kind of come into a sort of terms with your moment. And many people tend to not acknowledge it as a kind of oscillation between a signal of reception, signal of expression, signal of reception, signal of expression. I find, you might not believe this, but you know how much of our psychology is based on just our inhale, exhale, and our blinking? Do you know that every time you blink, the world is like, the mind is like, where did the world go? And so imagine it, I'm telling you, it's just like our blinking. There is an oscillation between identifying as space and identifying as matter in this space. Visual data, sensory data, it's literally clay. Clay you can shape. But internal reality is more like you gotta kind of, like Jon Snow from Game of Thrones, just like on the Night's Watch, watch the unknown in front of you, you know? It has to do with our external technologies and internal technologies. Eventually in the future, let's say probably 200 years would be safe. I find we'll reach a point where we will become more minds than we are bodies. That's pretty much what the pattern of evolution was. It's kind of like this, we evolved to become thoughts, And now thoughts are wondering where they evolved to, and now are realizing they are a result of the objective phenomena, but the objective phenomena has no deeper meaning if the subjective phenomena is not there. So it's kind of like our bodies create our minds, but the moment the mind comes into creation, it's its own cause. So because it's its own cause, it thinks it creates everything. So it's kind of like your body, the subjective, the end of the subject, the end of the objective evolution was the beginning of the subjective evolution. That's my point. That's one thing that it's so crucial for me to pinpoint, you know, like that in some sense, this creature that was just moving without direction. It's as if evolution was was unconscious evolution was like speed. And then direction came and it suddenly was like velocity. And that direction was the subjective evolution. A sort of self-categorization method. So it was like literally the creature had an ability to see itself even if it closed its eyes. It could still be something. It could still be some conceptual point of attention. Now here's the thing. This is something phenomenal I heard. I don't remember exactly from where. But it was as if like, I think it was Jordan Peterson. Or maybe not. Maybe it was Terence McKenna. But it's this idea that the early human beings, they would get thoughts and they didn't have as much thoughts as we have now. Right now, children have, their attention is much more moving, like moving with much more flexibility. But back in the day, due to the conceptual limitation, it's like people, there was even a point, I think it was like during, let's say, Mayans and Aztecs could have probably experienced this, where they felt at the appearance of the thought was the truth. You can say that was kind of like, again, very primitive worship of the first thought that arrived. That means imagine like an alien comes down on Earth and we all think, oh my God, this alien is next level, oh my God. And suddenly like 2 weeks later, a more advanced alien comes down. And then 3 weeks later, like another more. And so we suddenly see we just reacted to the first data. So this is why in any sort, and pretty much I think in life, you shouldn't be too hungry about the temporary. And this is why ethics became very crucial, and even the notion of virtue. The way I kind of see knowledge and philosophy especially is that it's states of mind. And some states of mind, they can share a certain range, but eventually there's an unknown relationship with the cosmos. That unknown relationship with the cosmos is your person, like literally the realization that nobody else has your eyes. Just take that in. Nobody else sees what you see exactly in the same way. Because you have different eyes. We have different eyes. We have different designs, right? We're not clones of one another, you know? So if we all suddenly had this, were believed in only one ideology, literally one thought would become all of us, which would mean another way of a world of clones, and that world is useless. So I'm like, okay, now let's say, all right, so we don't like a world of clones, so nature's decided unique designs, even though it's like members of the same species, but each person's eyes is like, you know, a unique viewpoint. I remember in my poetry at first, like years ago, I wrote, the world faces many faces, and many faces face the world, like something like that. And what I meant is like, there is one Earth, but 8 billion versions of it hovering behind people's eyes. You see? That is, the issue is, as long as we're trying to escape through entertainment and hedonism, the issue of it is it gets boring. And some people may wonder, how could hedonism get boring? It's more boring to kind of look at emptiness. And you'll see that it's, the reason it gets boring is because man needs what works. That's the truth. Certain things, it doesn't matter what the subjective or the emotional view on it is. View the person has on the phenomena is. It's just, it is what it is. You know, some ideas you gotta know that you can't become. That means, believe it or not, I find man possesses thought. As much as thought possesses man, man possesses thought. Man looks at an object, and suddenly that object has a name, and suddenly that name relates to the name the being is given to itself, and suddenly this distance between names is kind of like the space between the words of history and how it all unfolded, you know. There was a man named Rishi Vyasa. Rishi Vyasa wrote back in the day. Okay, so he was a rishi. A rishi was a seer of thought. Seer of thought. A seer of thought means a being who can see thought. You know, it's the being is not the thought. The being can observe it from a distance. And you won't believe it, but the intellectual spirit will honor you that way. That means people think it's about just chewing data. That's what knowledge. No, no, no. It's literally an evocational dynamism and then a rhythmic expansion in accordance to how much the person is being honest with the known and the unknown. Aldous Huxley says there are things known and there are things unknown, and in between are the doors of perception. These doors of perception is the human position. And so this door opens, or now requires to open, beyond the linguistic simulation, beyond language. And this is why Mr.Within says there's a war of language going on. You don't see it. We're all living like civilized, like, oh, how do you do today? How do you do? Like, but what I'm saying is ideologies are living among us, and ideologies possess people, can possess people. I've literally seen, like, I'll give you an example. I was shocked when I found this out, and I didn't know what to make of it. And I at some point, I just had no opinion on it, because it was like, what opinion could I possibly have? You know, it was shocking. What I saw, there was a part, so I'll be honest with this. There's this place where there's a column, you can say, and this column was seen as the devil, and there was people 360 around this column stoning this column, that they feel the column was the devil. Now those people are with utter hate throwing the stones at the column, but because they've all gotten around 360, every person's stone is hit, and when they miss, it hits somebody's face. Do you see? So it's as if they're hitting each other, but blindly thinking they're hitting the column, blindly thinking the column is like a sort of kind of, you know, the shadow of the world, you know? So that's when that's ideological possession, because it's still going on. It hasn't changed. That means the creature came in the moment, just expressed the idea they wanted, and left. Nobody updated the moment. Of course, on some level, you know, any ideology can have a lawyer come and say come and say freedom, freedom, freedom. That means the internal law of allowance. I think we should start designing civilization like our brains, as if there is a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere. And the left hemisphere of civilization, literally these people, their ethos is inspired by, in some sense, more inclined towards the logos. You can say for the right hemisphere, it's more inclined towards the pathos. And these are directions. It's going a collective direction. It jumps. Suddenly people are all going to become one being. One being is going to get bored of being one being. It's going to separate into a bunch of other beings. A bunch of other beings are going to get bored with being like separate, and there's this endless thing. This is why it's kind of chaotic, I find, because the ultimate renunciation of the order is chaos. When you let go of the idea of the world, let's say, as the Sufis say, when you die before you die, that means the opinion creator, the value giver to the world has stopped. That means you become sight. You become pure attention and sight. And this is something where we don't embrace. And I'm not sure if the illusion needs to remain or it needs to kind of there needs to be a supernova explosion of kind of past patterns, realizing they never were past patterns when the future is here. The thing is, I thought that one state can hold it all. I thought like there was a time where I'm like, okay, world peace is gonna, I still have hope. And then I realized, oh no, again, the same issue. Every person's seeing their version of the world. And so do you know how many worlds, how many ways that the world can be peaceful? So there needs to be an internal responsibility, and an internal responsibility to be honest with your world. Honesty, there's there's an advantage about it. A lot of people feel it's like religious kind of enforced it too hard, too harsh. But what it is really the person, you see, it's kind of like the dishonest person has to remember false versions of himself, you can say. In other words, when reality is being too described by the past, it becomes false and unknown potential of the future. You see, so it's kind of like, sure, I can draw a painting, but is this painting going to be everything? Probably not. So what that means is our language is a sort of telescope in the moment of our creation. It's a certain lens. In this science fiction novel I'm working on, I've spoken about sky cities. Literally, it's like we mess up on the surface of the earth and we're like, where can we go? And at least either, let's say we go to a different planet like Mars or something, like Elon Musk predicts by the year 2020, 2022, it's like some dude may be chilling on Mars or something. the same notion of when you mess up the surface of the earth and you have to go a further distance away from it, it feels, the past feels that way. I don't know how to tell you, but I think everybody looks at their past and an emotion finds them. And the emotion that finds me, you know, like, especially after a certain point in my life, is just how long is the design going to be my attention? That's it, I ask myself. And you don't know, because I was raised, I don't blame anybody, you know, because it's as if you, by blaming the moment, you're blaming your mind. There's a kind of liberation that comes from recognizing the solitude of the mind. I find it's the same kind of solitude you require if you wanted to go into the Himalayas and the forests and live. That solitude would mean an utter dependence on the attention, you know. And there were these yogis who would say, like, this guy went to the forest to live, and the yogi came up to him and it's like, yo, if you fear the animal, or even if you think you're superior to the animal, and even if you sleep in a safe place, it's as if the moment the environment reacts. It's like sometimes the mob mentality is, you can say how, like, the earthquake shatters the whole ground. It's excuse me. Pretty much, I think every human being has to worry about two things: what to do with matter, and what to do with space. And what you really can do with space is envision and create. What you can do with matter is watch. You know, imagine, like, your communication is like, you're like a film director, you know. And as a film director, you create a movie, and then you're sitting back watching the movie, and you just remember how that film came about and how it appears now, as if one design, in various moments, different contexts are engaging it, so it has a different value. Kind of like, we still have the human design, but our behaviors, right? Our behaviors, it's like what is normal now wasn't what was normal like 1,000 years ago. The reason I shared that Sky City thing is simply because, think of it this way: imagine you had a time machine and you didn't go back in the past. You went back into the future. You saw what happened in the future, and you came back. And when you came back, it didn't matter how much you looked at the past. What was coming was more important than what had happened, what had already came and gone. And this is why, believe it or not, whether we like it or not, strong narratives, especially ones that get transcendental, because religion, you can say they are transcendental stories. They're not stories that the world is in one dimension. There's multiple dimensions to the world, even though they're all created as the creator in the same moment. But it's as if it's a multidimensional narrative. And when people meet the unknown and they feel there's something more, guess what? What does the marketplace offer them? The marketplace offers them, either you deny subjectivity and think that you're just a neural hallucination, a chemical hallucination. You know, electrons are hallucinating that they're people. You go to a position where you feel, no, it's the opposite. It's the heavenly trap, where you feel you're like, You feel your mind is the content of your mind is actually you observing the objective, so you'll start feeling like beyond the world. You'll suddenly get a kind of spiritual archetype. What that means is you'll start kind of worshiping the unknown. And there isn't anything wrong with worshiping the unknown, because you really aren't worshiping anything. It's a self-reflection. But it's like, it's much better to worship the unknown that doesn't have an image than worship the known that has an image. That means I find like the you see, when it's like, not only is it a transcendental narrative, the religious kind of context, but it's also a transcendental narrative where it reaches an end point where it's literally inconceivable. Because guys, I've asked many different kinds of religious people a question, and I'm like, what do you do you acknowledge the idea of the soul, and what is it? And I noticed, for example, different religions, literally it's as if they have different lessons, different behaviors. That's why I say, like, it's like when I look at history, I'm like, what is this? A database of all the different kind of ways that human beings live. And when I look at this database, I begin to notice patterns, kind of like the Matrix screen. Like when I read a history book, guys, it's just like I'm just seeing code. You are first the known, and then you notice the unknown. When you notice the unknown, you'll wonder about its presence, and you'll see the simultaneity of the subjective and objective reality. That means, guys, check it out for yourself. Every person has objective phenomena, and then the awareness to this leads to subjectivity, which is our attention personalizes. That means, trust me, like, it's kind of like this. We are still like how we were as children. You know how you see a child where you put, like, give it a toy, and the child's like in heaven, I'm so happy. Like, the child's kind of like, the really young child is like happy, you know. But when you take the toy away, it's like, oh my god, the shadows, darkness, what is this sorrow and suffering? Like, the child starts crying, you know. But when you give the toy back, it forgets it's crying, and it just becomes happy again, right? So what that means is the child doesn't need a story to get happy. It's, do you see what I mean? So it's kind of like our attention now. Let's say a professor in a university. How is a professor in a university like that? I would explain it to you like this: that the professor in the university is playing not with a simple toy, but with a complex vision. And you know, that complex vision, eventually value is required. That means history, like, not just history, just civilized, like, humanity is a story of value. What we valued survived. It was not survival of the fittest, it was survival of what was the highest value in that moment. What was not just a living chance, but what was the highest value. That means it was like, I don't know if you can say emotional intelligence developed, was what was left dormant until the objectivity evolved to a point where suddenly, I don't know if a sort of emotional language was there before the languages that we vocalize now. What is there beyond thought? Experience. What is there beyond experience? The inconceivable. What is there beyond the inconceivable? A point of ultimatum that never moved. You were free not because you, in some sense, succeeded in it through an obstacle only. You were free because that was nature. Like you don't know what I mean. Like there's a sort of freedom that it's taken away or it's not taught. I think it's the latter. I think as much as we can call the world cruel, I mean the world is much more civilized than thousands of years ago. It's like on days where I get stressed a bit, I just think like, oh man, it's like this. As much as I feel like like the day was heavy, you know, I feel like, okay, my ancestors had to run in battlefields with swords and kind of like live, you know, live that kind of life, you know. So it's like, how stressful is my day really? That's a way of eradicating stress, guys. So what it is it's very hard for me to kind of see, give a narrative, give a story, give a purpose to a field of intelligence. It's easy to give a story to a particle moving in a field of intelligence. It's very easy. It's very easy to look at an object and build a world around it. You know, you can say it was as if like, you know, a child put a magnet like U, like I remember this as a kid, like a magnet, kind of like letter U on a fridge. And then the universe began. Like you see, you can ascribe anything. That's the freedom of language, you know. But after that freedom comes, it becomes like a kind of dwelling in power, and eventually the dwelling of power will feel purposeless too. You know, it's kind of like the journey doesn't end, but various states may consider an end. That means when I can't remember what happened in the past, that moment, it's literally it's same result as the apocalypse. Same result as the apocalypse. Like as if what you forget, it's like it's never there for you anymore. You know. Think of like all the people you have met in your life. You know, whether you knew them for a while or you didn't, or just by your relocation or something. It's like the mind of that being was somewhere else, you know. So it's as if a collection of various moments of meaning. I also call these reference points. It's pretty much, where's the inspiration for human behavior coming from, and does it consider its world as a part of its moment, or does it consider itself separate from the world? When I say separate from the world, I'm talking about it more in like, you see, just like imagine every human being is a member of a gym, and this gym is called humanity, you know? So it's as if you being a member means you have to be responsible for the environment, for the again, let's say for the ethos of that community. You see, someone who's certain about the known is smart, but someone who's certain about the unknown, that means their certainty has a sort of is rooted in the unknown. You can say that is a glimpse into wisdom. You know, it's just fascinating when you think about it. In regards to shamanic practices, Native American practices, just thinking of like a person's diet is also influencing their psychology. And I always wondered, because it's as if, for example, you have kind of like halal meat, kosher meat, these different kinds of meat, you know? And at least the way I was introduced to it was like, believe it or not, this is such a savage memory, but it's just something I guess I had to see. Guys, when I was young, when I went back to Iran, they literally killed the sheep, and the blood of the sheep was spilling over like the parking lot. And it was traditional. And it wasn't out of savage cruelty kind of violence. It was more like in the context, like they would say a prayer, and by doing that they would get rid of the blood of the animal, and then kind of, I don't know, have some sort of thing, you know? But it was savage, at least for my mind, right? But it was justified, and the justification came subjectively. It's kind of fascinating how, in how many ways different thoughts in history have influenced different actions, and how much the being is aware of whether they are the doer or it's just the world happening, and they're just identifying with a little kind of handful of the sand in the hourglass, the limits of data. You know, the Buddha spoke about the middle way, and I'm kind of thinking it's like, is that where the educational system is eventually leading? That means whichever direction swayed, the other side will have complaints. You know, we give too much freedom in the educational system, there will be complaint. It's as if freedom and discipline are constantly fighting with one another. We have to find a way as a civilization to merge these in an efficient way. Now, if we think in the next 50 years, as Ray Kurzweil suggests this futurist, he says like automation's going to settle in. When automation settles in, that means literally the environment is attending to itself, so there is less requirement for physical labor. So if there's less requirement for physical labor, that means we're being literally pushed by our ecosystem into becoming minds. And if the mind is too oriented to data, then eventually, guess what? Data can get processed not just by a human being, but also by a machine. That means I kind of feel like we are being pushed towards being minds, but that means it's like that's the whole point of our civility. Our civility is based on our awareness. You know, some people, of course, want to break laws, but you got to realize it's much easier to break something than build it. You know, and so when you look at law, in some sense, it's required. Even the scientist has to respect law. You know, so it's one of those things that laws are kind of required to preserve values, and as the values are preserved for a long time, they lead to an environment, and that environment breeds its own innovation. It becomes literally kind of an intelligent field. Guru Padmasambhava, guys, this is going to be kind of like the last story. Guru Padmasambhava was this enlightened guy, and evidently at the age of 8, he kind of appeared from the center of a lotus, you know, in the middle of a pond, and he just kind of stepped out and started teaching what, like the lake spirits, like enlightening the lake spirits, and eventually a king finds him. A king is walking by in that moment. It's like, whoa, random baby. It's like, I'm a king. How cool would it be? I'm the king who, you know, made a random baby into a king, you know. So it was like, I don't know, whatever. The Guru Padmasambhava, of course, I'm saying this very playfully. There's an incredible significance to Guru Padmasambhava. He's Guru Rinpoche is a unique light, I find, in the inner reality of man. So again, I don't want to get in too much into the archetypes of a bodhisattva, but I'll tell you this: like Guru Padmasambhava gets adopted by this king. Eventually, some strange things happen. It's like when he becomes like when he reaches a certain age, like he goes on top of a building and takes like a dagger, evidently, and drops it, and it falls on like kind of like, I don't know, the bishop's son, the right hand man of like the king's kind of son, and the king and that guy's like, yo, what the hell's your son doing, you know? And so the king confronts Guru Padmasambhava, and Guru Padmasambhava says something like very unique, like as if I was releasing that your son from his karma, you know, from his sort of kind of like, as if he's not meant to, as if he would go through something tragic and he's kind of shortening it, you know. It was kind of strange, right? And then evidently he gets exiled. It's like that's too far, you know. It doesn't matter if you're a prince or not. That's just too far. And so he kind of gets exiled, but he's such a profound being that it was as if he had a GPS system internally. That means there's stories of like certain with challenges and certain chaotic things happening in the world, and Guru Padmasambhava has already like months before started walking to that exact place where he needs to be, you know. So it's a very 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 unique kind of I hope like Tibetan Buddhist culture kind of shares these stories with the world, you know. Anyways, Guru Padmasambhava finds himself by a river where there's a princess. He doesn't know it's a princess, you know, she's a princess, and it's one of those things where Guru Padmasambhava sees this princess crying, and you know he goes and says, "What's up?" And what happens is they have an enlightening conversation, but there's a spy, and evidently, again, like as I mentioned earlier, like she's a princess. And because she's a princess, there's a spy kind of scoping what is this princess doing when she's left the kingdom. And the spy goes and tells the king, and suddenly Guru Padmasambhava is held by guards and kind of brought in front of the king. And he's kind of standing there, and then the princess already, she's smart, she already knows what's going to happen, you know, and she runs to her father and she says, you know, you got to stop this, kind of like that kind of wise daughter screaming at kind of foolish conqueror father, you know. Suddenly, Guru Padmasambhava notices that they're bringing firewood in the center of the town, and the people are kind of all crowded around that, kind of like a, you know, kind of the town's there, kind of watching. The king has summoned the town. The king is so like angered by this that he just forgets about the, like he can't, like the voice of the princess doesn't get to him. And in that moment, it's like this chaotic moment where the king says, this is what happens to any guy who goes near my daughter, you know. The crowd, kind of like Colosseum kind of crowd, you know, Greek Colosseum kind of crowd starts going crazy. Yeah, burn him, burn the guy. You know, we don't know who he is, but burn him. It's fun shouting, you know, like the mob mentality is occurring. Excuse me. The princess is crying. She's freaking out because she knew, she got a glimpse of who Guru Padmasambhava was. In that moment, the king, before he tells Guru Padmasambhava to go, Guru Padmasambhava just smiles at the princess and just goes. He just starts walking on his own and goes and sits in a meditation pose, kind of just in the middle on the ground in front of him, like around the firewood. And the whole town is like, whoa, this guy's strange. What's this guy doing, you know? And it's as if he just goes, as if he's not resisting his karma. He goes and he goes in there and he just sits, and the king's like, okay, yeah, all right, burn him. And everybody's watching and the crowd's going crazy. Yeah, yeah, this is cool, yeah. They're all shouting, you know, like maxed out mob mentality, you know. Suddenly, gasps are heard in the crowd. Suddenly, the crowd is no longer kind of in the mob mentality shouting. They've all become silent, and suddenly gasps are being heard as the flames are subsiding and ashes are remaining. And Guru Padmasambhava is sitting there as if the fire never touched him, as if like the fire moved away, you know, from him, you know. And he stands up and he still has the same smile, the same contentment with it, with his relationship with the universe, you know. And I'm not, honestly, I'm not making this part up. This is written. It's the king is like so stunned by this that he kind of like takes the opposite perspective and offers like Guru Padmasambhava gets married to the princess. And it's a very unique story because he went into the fires of a cruel world. And that's kind of like, honestly, like the presence of the world, I find. It is too, okay, it's like you can have an idea on it, but it's changing. You know, you can choose to try to pull the strings of the experiential, the witness, and eventually you come to a point where eventually, like how do I say it, it's you are, the edges of this world is infinite and empty. These are the edges. So the ethos of civilization is, I find, leading towards a state of mind that is, its trust is indistinguishable from a field of intelligence. The presence of a field of intelligence, no longer just thinking it's only a particle, you know. So anyways, guys, that's the end of the ethos of civilization. Kind of, if anybody has any comments or wants to share something, this is the time, you know. Honestly, guys, I'm just thinking about how the situation would be if the ultimate vision, if the most, it's like the common denominator and the organizing factor between all human beings is beyond shape. And how would it, that's why I say field of intelligence, because before one enters the inconceivable, it's the fruit, it's kind of like the peak of the collective. That means, as much as I've had an experience as an individual being, I'll be honest, there's been certain moments where it felt the personality was just a part of the moment, not the truth of the whole moment. Anyways, guys, I hope this talk was helpful. I feel I should call it a night. But thanks for tuning in. Much blessings and namaste.